Welcome today to the Mirowitz Center program for a tour of Crystal Bridges Museum in Bentonville, Arkansas. Today we are welcoming Sarah Young, who will be our guide with an introduction to the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art located in Bentonville, Arkansas. She is involved with the museum for the past 9 years, offering tours of the galleries, sculptures, and the museum architecture. She is a retired lawyer and has lived in Northwest Arkansas for 22 years, having moved there from Santa Fe, New Mexico. On the tour today, she will give us an overview of the museum campus, as well as a look at a few highlights of the galleries and sculpture trails. Also, we'll briefly visit a Frank Lloyd Wright designed Usonian Home, which was literally moved to the museum from New Jersey. Also joining us today is James Daines, an architectural and Frank Lloyd Wright house guide at Crystal Bridges for the past 5 years. He is an industrial machine designer with a passion for architecture. He lived in Iowa and retired to Arkansas 5 years ago. James will be running the slide presentation and assisting Sarah with questions after the presentation is over. And I just want to note that we have a lot of people today, and so please be patient as we answer some questions. Thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and James. Welcome, please. Thank you so much for doing this for us today. We are very happy to see you.
Thank you. It's our pleasure.
Yeah, really.
So good afternoon again. And as Judith said, my name is Sarah Young, and I'll be your volunteer Crystal Bridges guide today on this virtual tour. As she mentioned, I've been involved with the museum for almost 10 years, and I offer tours of the galleries, the sculptures, and the museum architecture. And also, as she mentioned, joining us is my colleague, James Daines, and he is an architecture guide and a Frank Lloyd Wright expert. Both of us will be available to answer your questions at the end of the tour. So again, thank you for this opportunity. And today I'd like to introduce you to our museum, the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, located in Bentonville, Arkansas. We'll take a look at a few of the highlights of our galleries and the sculpture trails, as well as a quick look at a Frank Lloyd Wright Usonian Home, which was literally moved here from New Jersey. So the initial part of our tour will be an overview of our museum campus, as well as a brief introduction to some of those outside sculptures. And then we'll take a little more concentrated time inside the museum as we take a look at a few of the museum's highlights, which of course is an impossible choice because there are so many highlights. And with a couple of exceptions, we've also tried to choose art mostly by artists not widely represented in your area. And again, that also was no small feat. The beautiful tree in the slide that you're looking at is a 47-foot high by 45-foot wide sculpture titled Yield. It was created in 2011 by Roxy Payne, and it was his intention to relate nature to machines. And he does this by repeating natural branch-like forms in an industrial material comprised of welded and polished steel. We'd like to begin with our acknowledgement to the Indigenous people of our area. So if you would please take a moment to read this honoring. And again, thank you for inviting us. The tour will be about 45 minutes, give or take, with plenty of time afterwards for questions. So I invite you to use the chat room during the tour, and we'll answer those and other questions at the end of the tour. And so now, if you could please make sure you're muted, let's begin. So located on over 120 acres in beautiful Northwest Arkansas, Crystal Bridges opened on November 11, 2011 at 11 o'clock, which is why our restaurant is named 11. Last November, we celebrated our 10th anniversary, and currently there are over 4,000 works of art in the permanent collection. The museum's visionary is Alice Walton. She's the daughter of Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. And growing up in Bentonville, Miss Walton was always interested in art. And as a child, she painted watercolors with her mother. But there were really no museums in the area, and she wanted to change that. And did she ever? The Walton family agreed to contribute the land for the museum. And Walmart sponsors admission to the museum so that the grounds and the permanent collections are always free to the public. And in addition to the museum's mission of art, architecture, and nature, education, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access mark cornerstones of Crystal Bridges. It's my understanding that Alice Walton feels that it is the in-person interaction that a person experiences when they see a great piece of art that creates that personal sensation and reaction. So one of the things that we have as a culture at Crystal Bridges is a policy of trying to lend as much work as we can. So if it's not on our walls, someone is enjoying it elsewhere. And to promote that, Alice Walton is also the visionary behind Art Bridges, which is a program designed to expand access to American art, especially in regions where there is currently less opportunity. And this foundation, in partnership with the Terra Foundation, provides strategic support and funding to create art projects and exhibitions. Our museum was designed by the internationally acclaimed Moshe Safdie. He's committed to architecture that supports and enhances the project's program. And in his words, it is architecture that is informed by the geographic, social, and cultural elements that define a place, and that the architecture responds to human needs and aspirations. Some of his other projects include the Kaufman Center for the Performing Arts in Kansas City, the United States Institute of Peace in DC, Habitat 67 in Montreal, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa, and Marina Bay Sands in Singapore, just to name a few. The museum's 217,000 square foot building complex is a series of interconnected pavilions that ring around two ponds fed by a natural stream called Town Branch Creek. These pavilions house galleries, meeting and classroom spaces, a glass enclosed gathering hall, a restaurant overlooking the water, and a 50,000 volume art research library. And it's designed so that as you tour the museum, you would also experience open vistas, uniting the power of art and the beauty of nature. The primary materials used in the building of the museum are architectural concrete, glass, wood, and copper. And much of it was sourced in Arkansas, in keeping with Moshe Safdie's philosophy of the importance of place in his designs. There is only about a 6 to 9 foot buffer between the buildings and the surrounding natural forest. So in this photo, if you look closely, you'll see a small amphitheater known as Walker Landing. And I would like to quickly pay tribute to the Walker family and other contributors who have provided an endowment to Crystal Bridges to encourage students from about a half a day away from the museum to visit the museum. So once the teacher has booked their class on the calendar, this program provides educational materials, It pays for a school bus and a school bus driver, a substitute teacher if necessary, and it brings the class to the museum where our educators provide tours, and finally, the students receive a free lunch before returning home with follow-up information. Before the pandemic, on any given day, there were usually at least a half a dozen school buses parked at the museum. In 2019, about 60,000 students in grades K through 12 were introduced to Crystal Bridges through this program. And now, for the time being anyway, students are again visiting the museum in person. There's an extensive outdoor trail network covering over 5 miles on the museum campus, including the North Lawn Trail, where visitors can experience Mark de Severo's 44-foot high steel sculpture titled Lowell's Ocean. It's constructed from I-beams and steel plates bolted and welded together, with many of those joints intentionally left visible. Visible and really a significant part of the creative process. And you may be familiar with some of his sculptures, which are part of your sculpture parks in your area, including Bornibus and Aesop's Fable sculptures. Now, if you were here, you would also be able to see and enter a 50-foot diameter Buckminster Fuller geodesic dome, which is comprised of 161 fiberglass shapes. Buckminster Fuller spent much of the early to mid 20th century looking for ways to improve shelter. And this dome was originally designed to accommodate both living and workspaces. Then accessible by either trail or elevator, the mile-long North Forest sculpture loop wanders through the forest and highlights sculptures such as Alison Schatz's 9-foot wide shattering screen, created in 2016. It's comprised of thousands of mirrored, polished stainless steel discs sewn together with stainless steel wire. The discs create a hanging screen of reflection, giving the work an almost weightless, fragile quality. There is also Dale Chihuly's Sol de Oro, created in 2017 and comprised of 1,300 individual pieces of hand-blown glass, with the glass tendrils mimicking the rays of the sun in various shades of yellow. There is also one of his colorful Fiore boats with over 170 hand-blown glass forms. Your St. Louis Art Museum has his beautiful white glass baskets and the gorgeous wine chandelier in its permanent collection. And hopefully some of you have had the opportunity or had the opportunity to visit his 2007 Glass in the Gardens exhibit in your botanical garden. And that included his iconic blue chandelier, which I believe is still in the entrance area of the botanical gardens, although a guest not too long ago mentioned that there's a new visitor center in the works, so not sure exactly where that gorgeous piece is. Lastly, and not to be missed in the North Forest, is Nancy Rubin's Monochrome 2. It's a sculpture of 61 recycled canoes and small boats jutting out from a steel armature, and they're held in place by wire. Then the south entrance of the museum exits directly onto the 1/2 mile long art trail, which connects the museum to the nearby City of Bentonville Square. And along that trail, you'll be treated to sculptures such as Andre Harvey's 560-pound bronze Stella, to Deborah Butterfield's horse sculpture titled Red Stick, which was originally created by using natural materials and then cast in bronze. Other sculptures include Dan Ostermiller's 600-pound whimsical bronze bear enjoying a shore lunch, which is also the title of the sculpture. And further along the trail, you would usually be able to view or participate in James Turrell's Sky Space, The Way of Color. It is a 30 to 40-minute visual experience of light, which happens most days at sunrise and sunset. Last March, his Orca Blue-Red installation, another light-based installation, was open to the public as part of the Projects Plus exhibitions of the Barrett Pereira projects in St. Louis. The Crystal Bridges Art Collection offers us an amazing overview of American art. Also, there is a year-round schedule of special exhibits that ensure there is always something new to see at the museum. And as we'll see, the gallery design itself offers you an opportunity to become immersed through art that highlights the complexity of our nation's history. Now, on our in-person public tours, those are interactive, and we would usually invite you to participate in examining a work of art with us. However, touring remotely during this time, and although Zoom is great, interaction is more difficult. So I'll give you an overview of the art that we are viewing and ask questions for you to silently consider. At the end of the tour, we'll answer your questions as well as those that you post in the chat room. So let's get started. Welcome to our first gallery work of art, We the People, by Harlem-based artist Nari Ward. Can you read the writing? They are the first 3 words of the US Constitution, We the People. He also recreated the font used in the Constitution. And those words at that time expressed the sentiment of the founding fathers in putting forth a government and a nation of the people versus that of a royalty. It expresses hope and the ideals of liberty, equality, and justice. But of course, at that time, we the people would have been mostly male landowners, the majority of the people able to vote. For the most part, it would have excluded women, people of color, and any male not owning land. Like the Constitution itself, the sculpture encourages conversation. And it's that conversation that changes over time. Our constitutional amendments reflect this also. Nari Ward was born in Jamaica, and when he was 12, his family moved to the United States. Very early on, he realized that his drawing abilities would become a very important part of his life. And after 9/11 and the passage of the Patriot Act, Nari Ward decided to formalize his US citizenship. And as a part of that process, many of the founding documents are read and discussed. And of course, one of these was the US Constitution. He was taken with the notion of we the people, all of us, with all of our similarities and all of our differences. And it's been said the United States is a melting pot, or perhaps more accurately, a mosaic, with each individual component being complete in and of itself, but also a part of the whole. Now, looking again, can you tell what material is used? If you could get closer to the work, you would no longer be able to read the words, but you would see that the material used are shoelaces. Nari Ward chose to use a material that all of us, all the we the people, would easily recognize. And other materials that he's used for his sculptures include baseball bats, shovels, baby strollers, tires, and even carpet remnants. This particular artwork, created in 2015, measures 27 feet in length, and it stands about 8 feet high. When this work of art first arrived at the museum, it was a series of templates in which Nari Ward had drilled the specific design and placed shoelaces in each of those drilled holes. The gallery wall was then drilled to match the template, and each shoelace was moved one by one, from the template to the exact corresponding location on the gallery wall. And the location of this work is directly across from a variety of paintings from many different time periods, each representing a part of the diversity of our American culture. So it is as if by using this particular placement, there's an ongoing conversation taking place between we the people and other people across the gallery from it. Those people representing pre-colonial to contemporary Americans. So moving forward, were we in person, you would view artwork covering the 1600s to the 1800s, inviting us to explore the identity and development of our nation through American art. And it would include works by artists on view in some of your areas, museums, such as John Singleton Copley, Gilbert Stuart, Rembrandt Peale, and others. And as we virtually walk through the galleries, you'll notice that wood is everywhere. The wood beams or glulams are crafted of many layers of southern pine shaped in Magnolia, Arkansas. The wood floors are made of red oak, milled in Monticello, Arkansas. And many of the benches throughout the museum are actually made from walnut and oak trees that were removed from the construction site during the building of our museum. Now, as an example of our nation's early development are our next works of art. First, we'll view them from a distance and then move in closer as James changes the slides. Experts have identified these oil on canvas portraits, each about 4 feet tall and almost 3 feet wide, as 3 generations of the Levy Franks family, a prominent German Jewish family living in New York City. All of these portraits were created in 1735 using a traditional style of American colonial portrait painting known as limner. That name is derived from the word illuminator, and it is a term that is applied to the works of untrained or anonymous artists that were active in the English American colonies. Of course, at that time, these portraits were, when they were created, there were very few painters in the colonies with extensive or even minimal formal art training. So the limner tradition is well known. These particular portraits are attributed to the artist Gerardus Duyckinck, perhaps one of the most well-known limners from this area. He was also a stained glass artist, and it's likely that Gerardus Duyckinck supplemented his income with commissions to decorate signs, carriages, fire screens, and other furnishings for his well-to-do patrons. And during this time of the colonial period, portraiture, having your portrait painted, highlighted your economic and social status. Landowners and merchants commissioned portraits of themselves posed in their finest clothes and were set within expansive interiors or landscapes, which further identified their status, their wealth, property, and sophistication. These extraordinary paintings of the Levy Franks family are no exception. A central focus of the portrait grouping is Abigail Levy Franks, and she's the eldest daughter of Moses Levy, and also, we believe, the person who commissioned this series of her family's portraits. As an aside, the limner style of family portrait painting was most likely inspired by British prints of royalty, using poses and styles of dress similar to those that we see in all of the Levy Franks paintings. These family portraits, as well as 35 surviving letters from Abigail to her son Naphtali, who had joined the family business in London, together they offer us a rare view of 18th century New York, as well as highlighting the personal lives and strong network between the memory and the members of the 3 generations of the Levy Franks family. Those letters remain in the collection of the American Jewish Historical Society. In the next painting, we take a closer look at Abigail's father, Moses Levy. He was a prominent merchant. The artist has added the ship in the background to tag his accomplishments as a successful businessman in trade. Also, the Franks Levy family played an important role in the establishing of the Jewish faith in America. In fact, Moses Levy's grave in Lower Manhattan is in the first Jewish cemetery in the United States. Next, we shall spend a moment with Jacob Franks, Abigail's husband, who was an agent for the British during the French and Indian War, and he was also a dominant figure in the West Indian sugar trade, as well as being the largest financial contributor to the building of the first synagogue in North America. Now, 5 of the 9 Franks children are included in these family portraits. They are all wearing luxurious clothing, indicating the family's wealth. And as with the other portraits, the addition of landscape and various family pets further explore this rendering of a life of privilege and social standing, as well as that of a prominent economic status. An important focus for Crystal Bridges is ensuring that significant works of art reflecting the richness and diversity of the American experience are accessible to the public. And collectively, these portraits are among the earliest examples, not only of Jewish portraiture in colonial America, but probably the oldest family series of portraits to survive in all of American painting. Now, as we move forward in time, we visit your city of St. Louis. This work of art, titled View of St. Louis, is a 29-inch high by 39-inch wide oil painting created between 1832 and 1835 by Leon Pomerad, a French immigrant who lived and worked in St. Louis for over 50 years. In this painting, he's captured the bustling activity of ferry boat traffic as explorers, fur trappers, hunters, merchants, and settlers all pass through the busy St. Louis hub on the Mississippi River. The painting captures the view from the Illinois side of the river, looking west towards the city on the opposite bank. Now, moving into our next gallery division, on view are artworks from the mid-1800s to the early 1900s, again inviting us to explore the impact of mobility on our nation. And during that time frame, Americans took advantage of opportunities for social mobility through education, and also increased their geographic mobility as the country expanded its boundaries. And much of these changes are reflected in the works on view by artists, again, many of whom you might recognize in your area's museums, such as artists from the Hudson River School, including Thomas Cole, Albert Bierstadt, and Thomas Moran, and also by such artists in the latter part of this time period, such as Robert Henry, George Bellows, and Mary Cassatt. Again, just to name a few. Also, as an aside, look and notice the curve of the walls. They reflect the natural formation of the ravine in which the museum was built. Now, of course, artists also traveled abroad, particularly to Europe, and were influenced by some of the techniques they encountered during those travels. So moving forward through time, about 100 years, our next work of art is an example of American 20th century modern art. Titled Synchromy, this oil painting, created by Stanton McDonald Wright in 1918, measures about 50 inches in height by 20 inches in width. And now, as we begin to look at that painting, focus on that center green circle nestled between overlapping wedges of color. Stanton McDonald Wright said he painted shapes. At first glance, and definitely from a distance, the painting can appear abstract. But in this painting, the artist has given us a hint as to its subject by naming it Au Café. If you take a closer look, I think you'll be able to see two figures sitting at an outside table, sharing perhaps a glass of wine. Do you see the two people? The green circle now becomes the bottom of a wine bottle, and you can see a woman in the upper portion of the painting pouring wine into her glass. And then further down in the painting towards us, we see the back of a man sitting across from the woman. You can see his hair combed back and the side of his glasses, and we think this is a self-portrait of Stanton Macdonald Wright. Stanton Macdonald Wright and his colleague Morgan Russell studied in France, and they were influenced by Cubism. Together, they invented the term synchromy. They felt that color and sound are similar. Symphony, is with sound. Synchromy is with color, chromy. And although I am not a musician, it is my understanding that Western music is comprised of 12 notes, and that it is the spacing between those notes that creates melody and harmony. There are also 12 colors on the color wheel. Stanton Macdonald Wright felt that the variances in different tones between the major colors evoke feelings and emotions. He also studied and lived in Japan, where he was influenced by Japanese sensibilities and Zen Buddhism. In some of his writings, he stated that he actually paints haikus, the traditional Japanese poetry emphasizing the simplicity, intensity, and directedness of expression. So now again, moving forward in time, we enter our contemporary gallery. So when you visit this gallery in person, you'll be able to enjoy art by such artists as Norman Rockwell, Mark Rothko, Joan Mitchell, and Andy Warhol. Again, just to name a few. So not only are evolving techniques represented in this gallery, but like our previous visit with Nari Ward and his We the People, artists are now also using their works to discuss American politics and policies. So political overtones are voiced in our next work of art titled Our Town, created in 1995 by Carrie James Marshall. The work is huge. It's about 12 feet wide and 8 feet tall, and it's acrylic and collage on canvas. At first glance, we might focus on what might be an idyllic setting. There's a boy and a girl playing with their dog, and bluebirds of happiness reminiscent of Disney films are flying across the top of the painting. A beautiful white house is in the back with mom waving to the children. There's also an above ground swimming pool and swing set. However, when we look more closely and focus on the faces of the children, do they look happy and carefree? Probably not. There's determination and an almost angry look on their faces. At first glance, the girl looks like she's wearing a Campfire Scout uniform, but look closely at her clenched fist. Is it reminiscent of a Black Panther salute? And what about those trees? What do yellow ribbons usually stand for? Someone is away from home and loved ones are anxiously awaiting their return. The figures are undeniably Black. Kerry James Marshall is African American. Kerry James Marshall has stated that he wanted the skin tone on the figures Black enough that there was no question about race. At the time Our Town was created, many of his contemporaries were painting highly abstract work. But Kerry James Marshall felt that it was important that someone had to start representing Blackness in the extreme and figuratively, letting it be beautiful. This painting is a part of his Garden Project series, based on various housing projects throughout the United States. Now look closely again at the girl. What are those bubbles coming out from the top of her head? Could they be a dream bubble? Is it her home, or is it a home that she's dreaming of? The houses next to it are much smaller, no windows. Are they representing former slavery quarters? And if you look closely above the bluebirds and next to the title, Our Town, there's a turquoise blob right before the word our. Could it be covering the letter Y? Perhaps this is really your town. Carrie James Marshall was born in Birmingham, Alabama, the center for the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s. He was born in 1955. In 1963, his family moved to the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles, home to the 1965 Watts riots. Experiences from both of those locations set in motion his commitment to social responsibility. Lastly, what about that graffiti? A few years ago, Kerry James Marshall spoke to us at our museum, and he told us that they really don't mean anything, that they're automatic drawing. But other people have looked at the painting and determined that they could also unconsciously symbolize the confusion of the times. And is the sun rising or is it a sunset? And what about that fire hydrant? Remember the marches in Alabama. The more you look at this painting, the more you'll see, and the more questions we can ask. Hopefully, many of you heard him speak and viewed his exhibit at your Contemporary Art Museum in 2013. Also, another of his works, not unlike Our Town, is Carrie James Marshall's Watts 1963, which is part of the St. Louis Art Museum's permanent collection. Our last painting that we'll visit inside the museum is another example of an artist voicing political issues through their art. This one, The Cost of Removal, was created in 2017 by Titus Kaffar. This is also a very large painting. It is 9 feet tall by about 7 feet wide and features President Andrew Jackson riding on a white horse. The artist based the painting in part from another painting titled Andrew Jackson on Sam Patch, which was painted in 1833 by Ralph Earl. Now that one is a typical classically styled painting of Andrew Jackson sitting on a white horse looking out over the American horizon. Titus Kaffar was inspired by the subject of the painting, but he recreates his own version. He's modified the image by using rusted nails to affix about 20 to 30 strips of canvas onto the painting, coming down from the middle of his face and across his chest. The strips of canvas are each about 2 inches wide and 4 feet long, and they feature text from Andrew Jackson's writings, which unfortunately set in motion the true cost of removal, the true cost of removing Native Americans from their land, and this forced removal of Southeastern tribes to lands west of the Mississippi River came to be known as the Trail of Tears and resulted in the death of thousands. In an art survey class, Titus Kaffar was shocked that of his 400-page textbook, only about 14 pages included art by African Americans. Titus Kaffar is African American. So when the class came to that section of the book, the instructor skipped over it. And needless to say, Titus Kaffar was upset and confronted her. She said she simply did not have enough time to cover the limited number of works, and it became clear to him then that if he wanted to know Black art history, he was going to have to seek it out on his own. His artwork is not about changing history, but it is about amending history. Another moment in his life that informed his work was when he took his 2 sons to the American Museum of Natural History in New York. Walking outside, they saw a sculpture of Teddy Roosevelt on horseback. Walking on one side of him was an African American, and walking on the other side of him was a Native American. His 9-year-old son innocently asked why one person got to ride on the horse and the other 2 had to walk. In Titus Kaffar's opinion, this highlights the complexity of our American history. Now, it is my understanding that the Natural History Museum and the City of New York have agreed to remove this bronze sculpture after years of objections that it symbolizes colonial expansion and racial discrimination. Titus Kaffar's practice seeks to dislodge history to unearth its contemporary relevance. And his art focuses on people and their stories, people who have traditionally been considered less important or ignored altogether. He invites us to relook at long-held historical truths. Do they tell the whole story? Probably not, especially as they pertain to power and subjugation. So now, leaving our galleries, we will visit one last work of art. Crystal Bridges is excited to have one of Louise Bourgeois' 8 large sculptures from that spider series known as Maman, the French word for mommy. This work of art was created in 1999 when the artist was 88 years old, and it is currently the largest of her bronze spider sculptures in the United States. She stands 33 feet high and weighs 24,000 pounds. Each of her legs is about 2,700 pounds. She also carries 20 marble eggs in the bronze woven sack under her body. Marble was also her choice for her sculpture titled Cell, 3 white marble spheres, which is part of the St. Louis Art Museum's permanent collection. And I believe it is currently on view in the sculpture hall when the museum's open. Now, as we leave the museum campus, let's make one last stop. A Usonian home designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in the early 1950s for Gloria Bachmann and Abe Wilson. As you may know, the word Usonian was derived from an abbreviation of the United States of North America. And Wright used this term to describe a distinctly American style of architecture, which he began developing during the Depression with the hope that it could be affordable to the average middle-class family. The front of the house offers privacy, yet there's a clear story to allow light to flow inside. The home is very horizontal, and the front wall even extends out beyond the house. Frank Lloyd Wright stated that a home should grace the landscape, not disgrace it. There are 2 of his Usonian homes in the St. Louis area. The Usonian Automatic Papa's House in Town and Country, Missouri, and the Krause House in Ebsworth Park in Kirkland, Missouri. James Dane, who has been navigating our slides today, is a Frank Lloyd Wright expert, and I'm sure he'll be able to further elaborate on this Usonian style of architecture at the end of our tour. So the Bachmann-Wilson house is less than 1,800 square feet. It was originally built along the Millstone River in New Jersey, and the 4th homeowners, Sharon and Lawrence Tarantino, fully restored the home to its original beauty. Unfortunately, due to multiple floodings, the Tarantinos knew that to save the home, it had to be relocated, and an agreement was reached to move it to the Crystal Bridges campus. The entire home was dismantled, piece by piece, everything labeled, a gazillion photos taken, and it was then moved to Arkansas. With the guidance from the Tarantinos, this Usonian work of art was reconstructed at Crystal Bridges, where it is open to the public. Inside, the wood is all board and battened Philippine mahogany, which actually was a lucky choice since it's relatively water resistant. The downstairs heating is radiant heat, extending even out to the outside deck. All furniture was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. We have a wonderful legacy of architects at Crystal Bridges. Alice Walton originally thought the museum would be located on high ground overlooking Town Branch Creek. While visiting the Walton family home, designed by Arkansas architect E. Fay Jones, Moshe Safdie was enamored by the water feature that Jones had incorporated into the home. He and Ms. Walton then decided to move the museum building down into the ravine itself, with it bordering along a portion of Town Branch Creek. E. Fay Jones was an apprentice of Frank Lloyd Wright. So Frank Lloyd Wright influenced E. Fay Jones, who in turn influenced Moshe Safdie. All three of these architects and also Buckminster Fuller are recipients of the American Institute of Architects Gold Medal. In late February of 2020, Crystal Bridges opened a satellite facility called the Momentary. It's a contemporary art space in downtown Bentonville, focusing on visual, performing, and culinary arts. It occupies a decommissioned and repurposed 63,000 square foot cheese factory and serves as a gathering place to relax, to work, eat and drink, and to discover today's art through programs, exhibitions, and festivals. So both Crystal Bridges and the Momentary are open, although with very strict guidelines for all of our safety during these uncertain times. So come and see us. And if you already have visited, please come again. Things are always changing. However, I suggest that as you plan your trip, call the museum just to double check what's open and what is not. And as I mentioned, some of our works are not always on view and may travel from time to time. So, and in addition, some of the sculptures have also been relocated. So if there's any art which you're particularly interested, just call to make sure it's home. And speaking of things always changing, the museum recently revealed plans for an expansion that will increase the current facility by 50%, adding nearly 100,000 square feet to the 200,000 square foot facility. And this expansion will allow the museum to showcase its growing collection and welcome more visitors to experience the power of art. The goal is to have this addition completed in early 2026. So thank you. It's been my privilege to spend this time with you today. And now in our remaining time, James and I welcome your comments and questions.
Oh, is anyone, Linda?
I can't express how fabulous that was. First of all, thank you. I feel like I actually was there, and I've wanted to go there for several years. This was spectacular. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And please come visit.
I want to.
Linda Lieberman?
Hi, I just wanted to get the name. You mentioned that other museum that is in a different location. What was that called again?
It's called the Momentary.
Oh, the Momentary. Okay,
And
thanks.
it's about, James, I guess 1.5 miles away from Crystal Bridges.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's
So-
not very far, yeah.
It's not very far. And in your travel plans, Crystal Bridges is closed on Tuesday, but the Momentary is open on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Oh,
And,
thanks.
and then the Momentary is closed on Monday, but Crystal Bridges is open on Monday.
On Tuesday.
Thank you.
Yeah, on Monday, yeah.
We have a couple people with their hands up. We have a question that came up earlier. Sarah, it was, can you put the name of the male that was mentioned who founded the Majestic Institutions?
I'm sorry, say that one again?
You early on in the program, you mentioned somebody who, a gentleman who founded the Majestic Institutions. Maybe it was all of the, Carol Rose is the person who asked. Carol, do you want to elaborate on that, or?
Very beginning, you mentioned someone who sponsored Canadian and American institutions, and I didn't catch his name.
Oh, Moshe Softy, our
Yeah.
architect.
Yeah.
In fact, his master's thesis from McGill in Montreal was Habitat 67.
Okay, thanks.
And so he has offices, I think his design offices in Boston. He still has offices in Canada and
Yeah,
also
I know
in
his name
Singapore.
from Canada. I was just trying to verify that that's who it was. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, you bet.
Okay, and so we have Kent Hirschfelder next.
Yeah, I have two questions. One, is Moshe Softy going to design the expansion? And number two, when I was there about 4 or 5 years ago, it was before the Frank Lloyd Wright house was built. It was just around that time they were building it. And it seems like you, in your introduction, there's a tremendous amount of new installations, especially outside installations. How much time would you say to do it thoroughly, but not rush yourself? should we allow? Certainly overnight at the 21C, I would think.
I think
Yeah.
certainly overnight at 21C, which is a wonderful museum hotel on the Bentonville Square, which has some art in and of itself. It changes its exhibits about every 6 months. Yes, Moshe Safdie is absolutely involved in the expansion of the museum. So that expansion should be seamless. It should be beautiful. And you're right, the North Forest may or may not have even been open when you were here, but I would say that you can easily spend a couple of days at Crystal Bridges.
Yeah.
You might check the schedule before you come and orient your trip around some of the nights that Crystal Bridges is open later, which would also give you some more time. And also check out, what exhibitions happen to be there. There's usually a large temporary exhibit, but also 4 or 5 others. And you would definitely want to do the James Turrell Sky Space. And from 21C, you can just walk down the art trail and you're there.
When we
So,
were there, when we were there, Moshe Safdie was in residence for a few days
Oh,
Nice.
wow.
with a
Nice.
special treat.
Yeah, nice.
Thank you.
He's amazing. And we've been able to attend a couple of events where he and Alice Walton shared the stage talking about the museum. And you can just tell by looking at the two of them, the wonderful relationship that they have. So it's just a great working environment. We got some statistics not too long ago, and it said that the average person may only spend 2 hours at the museum, which, I mean, maybe you can go into one gallery, but I don't understand it. So yes, I think 2 days minimum is
Yeah.
what you can do. There's also a wonderful Native American museum in the area. Also Eureka Springs, which is a Victorian kind of art colony, is about an hour away. And so there's lots to do.
Thank you, Sarah. Leslie, did you have a question next? And then Fran. Leslie, you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, I've been to Crystal Bridges several times, and it's one of my most favorite museums. I hope to be going next month also. But my question is, every time I go there, I'm surprised you don't have a Grandma Moses painting. And I wondered if there's any plans for that.
Well, I am too. And I'm sure that should one come available, that it more likely than not is part of, the curatorial acquisition list, because it's an iconic American, search situation. And of course, you have to wait for some of these things to become available too. But always, in fact, if I'm away from the museum for a month or so, every time I go in, there are new acquisitions. So stay tuned and check out the webpage, and you can browse the art to see the new acquisitions also.
Yeah, it looks totally different than when I was there.
Yeah.
Come back. Good. Come back.
I
next
am,
month then.
hopefully in a month.
Yeah.
And March and April are a beautiful time to
Yeah.
visit. The grounds are absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
for
you.
those people that are interested in architecture, we do have an exhibit that's coming in May that is going to be on architecture. And what they have done is went out throughout the Americas, North and South America, and picked out 5 architectural firms that each then are tasked with designing a 500 square foot look to the future sustainable house. And those will be erected on the grounds of Crystal Bridges, anchored by that Buckminster Fuller geodesic dome, and will be on display from May through November. So really neat exhibit I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely.
Thank you, James. And then Fran had a question, and then we
Yes.
have a couple of things in the chat.
Okay, well, first of all, we have not been, when we go, we want to go with you.
Okay. Well, and Judith knows how to get a hold of me, and I'm not going to volunteer James, but I will volunteer myself, and he can volunteer himself.
Yeah,
It has been my pleasure to actually get to meet some of the people that I've only met on Zoom in person when they come visit. So definitely.
Oh, wow, thank you. Okay, I have 2 questions about the outdoor stuff. One has to do with how do you protect the glass thing and the weather, because y'all have had some very bad weather lately. And two is, what do they do about algae blooms in the pond?
James, you want to take those or do you want? me
Sure,
to?
absolutely. Yeah. So you've asked the number one question that's always asked about any Chihuly piece outside. You know, what do you do about the weather? Well, you just hope for the best that things are going to be all right with it. His work is actually a lot thicker glass than what you normally think. Not really pretty durable. Of course, Mr. Shopty is always going to be happy to blow you a piece to replace anything that becomes damaged. And ironically, throughout all of our exterior exhibits, weather has never contributed any destruction to them. That Oriole de Sol that you saw, the sun, one piece was broken, caught on the security camera being done by a deer that decided to rub against it. So yeah, so and the other question on the algae, yeah. So we do a couple of things. It is a live moving stream, so it is constantly refreshing itself. It will come through about average of about 550,000 gallons of water a day pass through it. But we also aid in it with some aeration by using some bubblers to aerate it. And we stocked it with these fish that are called Asian copperback carp, which were only about 11 inches long when we put them in there, but now they're about 3.5 foot long, and all they do is submarine around all day and eat algae, and they're successful at it because they have grown so much. So yeah, those are some of the things. Along with we do have staff that will go out. And if it's excessive or if debris has been it or whatever, we'll take the boat out and pick up anything like that. But hopefully that answers your question.
And that boat is also the window cleaner. The boat
Yeah,
will
well,
go around and clean the outside windows.
Yeah, we have this little raft that I call it the Tom Sawyer Huck Finn raft that these two guys put scaffolding on, and they go out and position it in front of the windows on the bridges that are over the water and clean the windows. So it's pretty fun. It's a show in itself watching the windows being cleaned.
I see one question in the chat room about American Indian Native American art, and our collection does not have a lot of depth in Native American art, but we always borrow and have on loan pieces of Native American art to really express the entire history of our country. And there's a wonderful Native American art museum literally about 10-15 minutes away, which is also another reason that the emphasis was not on crystal bridges. On also the let's see, the museum in Tulsa, and I'm absolutely drawing a blank as to its name right now. And it's closed. It's closed for 3 years. So Gilcrease. So it doesn't really matter, but it has one of the finest Native American art collections in the country.
Yeah.
And that's 2 hours away.
Yeah. And one of the advantages of this expansion in the gallery on the South Bank Gallery is going to be a portion of it will be dedicated to indigenous artists, art by indigenous artists, not necessarily Native American art by artists, but more by the Native American artists. So I'm excited to see that expand, along with craft art is also going to be emphasized a lot more in that section as well.
Well, and we do have some wonderful Native American contemporary art pieces by Juan Quick-to-See Smith and Fritz Scholder. So there's more and more. And what Crystal Bridges also does is we had a marvelous Native American art permanent exhibit a few years ago. So in any of those areas that there's not the depth in our own collection, the museum really tries to balance that out through our exhibitions also.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Do we have time for just maybe one more question? We're really close on time here.
And I do see someone mention the E.P. Jones chapels nearby. And yes, There's one about 15 minutes away near Bella Vista, and also one in the town Eureka Springs. And they're Thorn Crown Chapel and Cooper Chapel, and they're beautiful.
Well, thank you so very much. It was such a pleasure and so much information. And, you know, if it wasn't snowing and if it was wonderful and warm and sunny outside, I'd want to get in the car and start driving.
Well,
It was
and
so
you guys are
beautiful.
experiencing the same day that we are down here. In fact, that's why I found the picture to put in my background, you know, because that's what it looks like right now.
Judy, let me know when you want to go. I'll go with you.
It sounds great. It sounds great. Oh, and Dee said she'll go too. I think we're
Okay.
gonna have a busload.
We
Well,
could.
good. We'll
That
see
would
you
be a
down
fun
here.
thing to do. That would be
Well,
good.
thank you, Sarah, and thank you, James. It was a wonderful presentation. We really very much appreciate your time and the wonderful teaser that you provided for us today.
Well, come visit.
Yeah.
Okay,
Come visit, and thank you all very much.
Yeah,
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
It was excellent.
Bye.
Thank
It's
you.
almost like I
Great.
never
Thank you.
visited it before, but I did. It was just all brand new again.
Oh,
Okay.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
thanks.
Thank you.